Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are here with another discussion with reference to the integrated pest management control. This is the second part of this lecture. Here we will learn about the different strategies and tools with the help of which we can improve our agricultural structure. Previously we have discussed a lot about the Integrated Pest Management Control or IPMC. Now let's we have a look at the strategies and tools with the help of which we can maintain our pest management or we can control pests. So in this regard, the heading is about the IPM strategies and tools. IPM includes the development and use of chemical, natural, biological, and biotech products for pest control. It may also involve computer-aided sampling and decision making as well as to improve farm equipment. Farmers are the primary decision makers in the IPM program. So, farmers are of primary importance, individually or collectively. They have to decide how to manage all the pests that may damage crops. The role of the plant science industry is to provide access to a wide range of useful technologies, products, services, and as much information as possible on their behalf. Most farmers will combine different IPM tactics and tools as a prerequisite to developing an IPM program. It is important to understand farmers' perceptions of pest problems and their current practices of pest control. IPM recommendation must be flexible as per need or as per resources of the environment or area or the country, and it should be flexible enough to adjust to changes in the environment, cropping patterns and market forces. The socio-economic effects of IPM components must also be examined. For example, the use of herbicides reduces farmer labor but may contribute to urban migration. On the other hand, manual weeding is time consuming, labor intensive, and not always possible to perform at the right time. This is problematic since yields of some crops suffer due to late weeding and root damaging. Here is setting an economic threshold. The extent of economic losses can vary significantly between seasons depending on weather conditions and other factors. Since the severity of pest infestation varies, it is generally far better to monitor pest population or the damage they cause before deciding to use a crop protection product or their intervention. Once an infestation has reached an economic threshold, the point at which the pest population level causes losses greater than the cost of controlling the pest, it is a time to intervene. Alternatively, modeling, for example, based on weather conditions, can indicate the need to intervene before the pest reaches the economic threshold, that is, late blight in potatoes. One difficulty with the use of an economic threshold as a decision tool is that it depends on the value of the crop. Income from the sale of the crop can change rapidly based on supply and demand in local markets. The threshold is also dependent on pest population and the stage of crop development at which it occurs. This matters because many crops can compensate for some damages during part of their growth cycle. Pest-resistant varieties can reduce the severity of an infestation, but pest population must still be monitored to see if additional intervention is required. Farmers need simple methods for quickly determining whether a pest population in a crop is likely to cause economic damage. Local knowledge can be used to help develop practical methods acceptable to farmers. In some regions, it may be possible to develop local databases to assist in market decisions on an area-wide basis. Now, protecting natural enemies. Conserving natural enemies of pests is an important part of IPM and helps to prevent pest resurgency. The effect of a crop protection product and other interventions on both pests and their natural enemies needs to be considered, and it is very important. Timing product application to period when natural enemies are not active, for example, may help protect them. Maintaining minimum pest and non-pest population for natural enemies to feed on may be essential for their survival. Research should also assess the importance of weeds and other local plants that may encourage survival of beneficial species at field edge. Population of beneficial species can recover quite quickly even when broad spectrum products are used, and particularly if they are easily degradable. This occurs with the migration and recolonization of separate areas from refugee areas at field margins. It is also possible to physically limit the impact of broad spectrum products. Part of a crop area can be left untreated to allow natural enemies to survive and recolonize the treated areas. Another strategy of IPM is selecting the right products. In developing an IPM program with crop protection products, it is essential to review product characteristics, applications, and cost. Then select the ones that provide the most cost-effective treatment with minimal undesirable effects. Some products have a broad spectrum of activity while others only target a few types of pests. Selective substances are less likely to affect natural enemies and other non-target organisms, but they are often more expensive and less widely available. When they are available, it is important to determine if fewer applications of them are more cost effective than a cheaper, broad spectrum product that requires more application. Seed treatments, which protect seedlings from early pests, are also beneficial and may prevent the need for crop protection product application later on. They minimize the impact of crop protection products as the active ingredient is often within the plant, where beneficial species do not come into contact. Most crop protection products have a broad spectrum of activity, and it's important to distinguish between their intrinsic toxicity and bioavailability. Bioavailability means the degree to which the active ingredient is absorbed or become available to the pest in the field. Another important IPM strategy or tool is the responsible handling of products used for the pest management. Every crop protection product should be used according to the manufacturer recommendations. They are designed to provide reliable control under normal field conditions. They also provide instructions on how to handle and apply the product safely. Recommended doses should be used to control pests and prevent them from developing resistance to products. Guidelines on the appropriate storage, transport, and disposal of unused products and empty containers should also be strictly followed. Targeted and timely application of crop protection products is key to effective and efficient pest control. This requires the use of appropriate and well-maintained equipment as well as knowledge of a pest. Many insects can survive under the umbrella of leaves if farmer only spray leaf tops by holding the nozzle above the crop. In excessive application, the spray runs down the top of the leaf and drain into the soil. This wasted spray can have a serious adverse effect on soil dwelling natural animals like spiders and ants. When farmers see pest survival, they will often spray crops as frequently as twice a week instead of investing in better equipment or changing their spray practices or products. Simple changes in farming practices like directing the nozzle to spray where the pest is located on the underside of the leaves or controlling spray pressure can improve crop protection product coverage. and better control pests. Some farmers spray late or alter the dose because of difficulties in obtaining sufficient water to spray, especially in semi-arid or dry areas. However, they are reduced volume techniques that allow farmers to treat pests more quickly when their population reaches the economic threshold. Preventing pest resistance to crop protection products. All farmers are challenged with the fact that pests adapt to a chief ingredient and eventually become resistant to them without preventing strategies. IPM offers a range of ways to reduce the risk of resistance developing. This includes monitoring pest population, applying treatment when the economic threshold is reached, and implementing strategies such as alternating or mixing compatible crop protection products or biotech seeds with different modes of action. To prevent or delay the onset of resistance, farmers or pest control advisors need to understand target pest biology and ecology, the efficacy of the crop protection product, and the pest sensitivity to it, stage versus a single insecticidal trade, product usage patterns, local cropping systems, and the availability of alternative pest management options, including biotech, chemical, biological, and cultural control. Biotech insect protected crops express proteins for insect control internally, offering excellent protection from damaging pests around the world. These crops can also offer superior environmental benefits while increasing growing income. Given this value, insect resistance management is essential. Strategies include planting refuge areas that do not contain biotech traits, squatting and applying crop protection products as needed, rotating different modes of action, restricting the use of a single insect control protein across multiple crops, destroying crops residue, using local adapted crop varieties with native resistance, and combining multiple traits targeting the same pest within a plant. The continued development of novel active ingredients for crop protection products and new biotech traits will expand to resistance management tools available to farmers. Additional tools will help manage pests economically and sustainably while protecting the effectiveness and value of all control options. So this is all about the integrated pest management control, and this is the end of the strategies and tools adopted by the IPM. Thank you. With the end of integrated pest management control, there is the start of ionic solvents. So today we are going to have a further glance at the introduction of the ionic solvents or ionic liquids. Ionic liquids are extensively used as ionic solvents because of their physical properties, because of different parameters which makes them more effective as a solvent. So let's see what are ionic liquids or ionic solvents. An ionic liquid, which is abbreviated as IL, is a salt in the liquid state. In some contexts, the term has been restricted to salt whose melting point is below some arbitrarily temperature such as 100 degrees Celsius temperature or 212 Fahrenheit. While ordinary liquids such as water and gasoline are predominantly made of electrically neutral molecules, ionic liquids are largely made of ions and short-lived ion pairs. These substances are variously called liquid electrolytes, ionic melts, ionic fluids, fused salt, ionic salt, or ionic glasses. Ionic liquids have many potential applications. They are powerful solvents that can be used as electrolytes. Salts that are liquid at near ambient temperature are important for electric battery applications and have been considered as sealant due to their very low vapor pressure. Any salt that melts without decomposing or vaporizing usually yields an ionic liquid. For example, sodium chloride NaCl, which is one of the best examples. Sodium chloride melts at 801 degrees Celsius temperature. In other words, 1474 degree Fahrenheit into a liquid which consists largely of sodium cation Na positive and chloride anion Cl negative. Conversely, when an ionic liquid is cooled, it is often formed an ionic solid, which may be either crystalline or glassy. The ionic bond is usually stronger than the van der Waals forces between the molecules of ordinary liquids. For that reason, common salts tend to melt at high temperatures than other solid molecules. Some salts are liquid at or below room temperature. For example, compounds based on the 1-ethyl-3-methylamidazolene cations are liquid at room temperature. Low temperature ionic liquids can be compared to ionic solutions, liquids that contain both ions and neutral molecules, and in particular to the so-called deep eutectic solvents, mixtures of ionic and non-ionic solid substances which have been much lower melting points than the pure compounds. Certain mixtures of nitrate salt can have melting points below 100 degrees Celsius. The term ionic liquids in the general sense was used as early as 1943. The ionic liquids are often moderate to poor conductors of electricity Non-ionizing, highly viscous and frequently exhibit low vapor pressure. Their other properties are diverse. Many have low combustibility, are thermally stable with white liquid regions, and favorable solvating properties for a range of polar and non-polar compounds. Many classes of chemical reactions such as Diels-Alder reaction and Friedel-Crafts reactions can be performed using ionic liquids as solvents. Ionic liquids can serve as a solvent for biocatalysis. The miscibility of ionic liquids with water and organic solvents varies with side chain length on the cation and with choice of anion. They can be functionalized to act as acids, bases, or ligands and are precursors salts in the preparation of stable carbenes. They have been found to hydrolyze. Because of their distinctive properties, ionic liquids have been investigated for many applications. Some ionic crystals can be distilled under vacuum conditions at temperatures near 300 degrees Celsius temperature. In the original work by Martin Irle et al., the authors wrongly concluded that vapors was made up of individual separated ions, but was later proven that the vapors formed consists of ion pairs. Some ionic liquids such as 1-butyl 3-methyl imidazoline nitrate generate flammable gases on thermal decomposition. Thermal stability and melting point depend on the liquid component. The solubility properties of ionic liquids are diverse. Saturated aliphatic compounds are generally only sparingly soluble in ionic liquids, whereas alkenes show somewhat greater solubility, and aldehydes can be completely miscible. Solubility difference can be exploited in biphasic catalysis as a hydrogenation hydrocarboxylation processes, allowing for relatively easy separation of products and or unreacted substance or substrate. Gas solubility follows the same trend with the carbon dioxide gas showing good solubility in many ionic liquids. Carbon monoxide is less soluble in ionic liquids than in many popular organic solvents, and hydrogen is highly soluble, similar to the solubility in water, and may vary relatively little between the more common ionic liquids.